So welcome everybody. If you're here to talk about radical place leadership in Scotland, you're in the right place. My name's Andrew Laird. I'm the Chief Executive of Mutual Ventures. We're an organisation that works with places and public services to try and make them better, more sustainable, and importantly, more connected to communities. And we work with central and national governments as well as local governments and the NHS. And I am delighted to be joined by three brilliant guests. I've got Lyndsay McRoberts, who is the South Ayrshire Deputy Chief Executive, and I've got Billy McClean, who is the Head of Community Health and Care Services in the South Ayrshire Health and Social Care Partnership, and Professor Donna, who is the former Wigan Council Chief Executive and a Non-Exec Director at Mutual Ventures. Just before we start, some house rules. If you have questions, you can post them using the Q&A function, we will try and get to as many of those questions as we can. We're also recording this, and we'll make that recording available, so there's no need to take copious amounts of notes. And we're using some slides, which I think we'll be happy to share as well. So first of all, I'm just going to do a bit of an introduction to the whole concept of radical place leadership. Then I'm going to ask Donna for some comments, and then Lyndsay and Billy will talk to us about the South Ayrshire journey. So, could one of my panelists just give me a nod, say that they can see the slides? Yep. Okay. Well, let's get going. So, radical place leadership is a concept that Donna and I have been working on for some time, really, and it's intended to try and solve some of the deeply entrenched challenges that exist when trying to deliver person-centered support locally. And one of the key issues is that services are in silos. So we know this. So those four silos there, it could be local government, the NHS, it could be police, it could be DWP, or it could be different service silos within a single organisation. And actually what happens, if you were to excavate a lot of the earth beneath those silos, you would find that part of the root cause of this is how services are funded, regulated, and inspected. And quite often that drives the behaviour that you see at the front line and encourages services to stay siloed and stay very narrowly focused. And a key reason for that, we all know this term, new public management. So this is the prevailing way of delivering public services. And it is really all about looking at a big societal problem, but then slicing and dicing it down into easily commissionable chunks. Now, what that means is that you totally lose the context or your appreciation of the context within which a person or a family exists, and you focus very much on delivering that specific service and trying to achieve specific targets. And this really doesn't ever solve the underlying problems, and it means public services quite often focus on a presenting issue rather than actually trying to solve the underlying issue. Now, there are examples around the UK where this has been challenged. The problem is that a lot of these examples exist within a bubble. They're not really part of the system. And that bubble is usually held together by either a very inspirational person operating on the front line who's dragging services together, pushing against the system, holding it together with their bare hands, or it's external funding. So quite often that happens when there is a central government funded program. And the problem is when that person leaves, the person who's holding it together, or the funding dries up, then the bubble bursts and the system tends to pull things back to where they were. Now, there is a way to address this, and this is the whole concept of radical place leadership, which we will get into as the discussion progresses. But we do this work across the UK, and actually in Scotland, what we're learning and what we're finding is that there are number of structural advantages actually that Scotland has against the rest of the UK. So you already have a fantastic blueprint for public services in the Christie Commission and things like the Promise. Excuse me. You also have integrated health and care, which does not exist in England. There are ambitions around that, but that's a real structural advantage. Community planning partnerships, which we've been working with in South Ayrshire, which is a structural advantage that places in Scotland have that other places in the UK do not have. The Scottish Government has established the Public Service Reform Board, so there is an opportunity there to engage with that body and with the Scottish Government on the wider reform agenda. I was at a conference on Monday with the Scottish Government talking about public service reform, and there's a lot of enthusiasm there for doing things differently and exploring how public services can really be reformed, and for those to be centered around place and really person focused. And the Scottish Government are saying that they want to double down on reform and to try and find efficiencies across the public sector. And just before Christmas, there was a report from Audit Scotland which suggested moves in a similar direction. So a radical shift towards more collaborative leadership models, which is what we're exploring through Radical Place Leadership, and in South Ayrshire, greater trust placed in public sector leaders to make changes at a local level. Again, a key part of Radical Place Leadership, and that radical shift away from tactical to strategic public service reform. And the conference on Monday was very much about that. It was about thinking about moving towards prevention through collaboration, through empowerment, and ultimately that driving out efficiencies. So I'm going to hand over to you to on this and to share some of your own thoughts.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks very much, Andrew. And yeah, just to reiterate, I live in Scotland now, and the policy context is much more beneficial for public service reform. There hasn't been a public service reform strategy in the UK government over the last 14 years. And I think people have kind of forgotten at the national government level about what reform actually is. And I think all the reform that I see in England is driven by local areas trying to do things differently. So places like Wigan, places like Gateshead, places like Camden, where they're really trying to make change happen on the ground, is coming not from the government, but from them. Whereas I think in Scotland, you've got certainly an ambition to reform public services at the policy level. But I think, as the Audit Scotland report said, there's something just not quite happening to make it actually be delivered on the ground. And whether that's the tighter grip that the Scottish Government has over the local areas, that might be one of the issues. There might be something about the way that NHS boards, because again, as Andrew said, they are much better and they look integrated. But I think when you dig beneath the surface, they're not really integrated, and decision making is still very much centralised and controlled through an NHS lens rather than a community and a place lens, in my personal experience. I do think there are some exceptions. Some of the work Bill is doing is amazing. I'm sure he's going to talk about that later on, but there are places where it's a very traditional old school model of NHS delivery. I think one of the things we need to really look at is the cost savings that come with radical place leadership, because I think we've kind of separated out reform from cost savings, and people think that you can't do both. And I think they are. Improving outcomes and reforming public services in the way we're going to describe in this webinar will also bring about cost savings, because the amount of money that we waste at the moment on trying to make new public management work. So the tepid bath of managed decline that Pat McFadden said recently in Parliament about the way that he'd used it to describe civil servants in Whitehall, but I think it could apply to all of us working as public servants, that a lot of the time we are managing decline rather than really stepping back and creating the space to think differently about a new model of place leadership, which starts with a person, and which builds services and support around that person, cuts out all the needless assessment and referral. I'm sure you've seen the Gateshead Liberated Method slides with the story of Brian and his 2 million journey through public services being passed from pillar to post around A&E departments, ambulance call-outs, mental health, emergency suites, the police, custody and the criminal justice system. That is not the way we should be delivering public services. And it just won't work if we continue with that siloed new public management approach. We found in Wigan, it's great to see Professor Kate Arden on this call, who is our Director of Public Health at Wigan. We really wanted to change that model. We introduced integrated neighbourhood teams like South Ayrshire, and we liberated our frontline teams to work differently with people on the front line. You can see in books like Radical Help by Hilary Cottam, case studies, more and more case studies that show that new public management is a busted flush. It really is. But yet we cling to it. Ella's story, Ella, based in one of the London boroughs, had 70 professionals in her life at one point at the cost of £300,000 a year. There will be people like that in your areas. And the way that we work as leaders, we owe it to people to have a different approach, a more radical approach, and one that starts with a person, strips out all that needless waste and inefficiency and delivers tangible financial savings as well as better outcomes for citizens. So it's a real pleasure to be here today. And I'm going to pass over now to Lyndsay McRoberts. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Donna. I'll just bring the slides back up because while I'm doing that, I completely agree about the whole cost point. I think services in silos, and I'm not going to make myself popular with consulting colleagues, but you find consultants coming in, looking at services within their silos, looking for efficiencies, and then going away. And because the gap between the services is not addressed, and that cost, as you say, of passing from pillar to post, assessing, it is not addressed, those inefficiencies just build up again. And quite often the same group of consultants come back in and say, we've done this before. So yes, I completely agree with that. Lyndsay, let me just maximize your slides here. And
I'll just give you a nod to.
Hopefully that will work.
Okay.
Can you see that on the full page now?
It's still not as a full slide yet.
Sorry. Right. Okay, hopefully that works now. Yep. Thank you. Sorry about that, Lyndsay. Over to you.
Oh, okay. No, that's fine. Thank you. Thank you very much for inviting us along this morning and for giving us the opportunity to share some of the South Ayrshire work that we've been doing with Mutual Ventures over the last sort of 18 months, and also hopefully to generate some discussion and thought round about where we need to go next. So if you can just move on the slide, Andrew, I don't think I can. Yeah. So I think, first of all, just to state that the challenges that we face within South Ayrshire will be very similar to other local authorities. A lack of funding over the last 10 years, an increasing level of need is what we are very much seeing within our local authority, in particular an ageing demographic we have within South Ayrshire. I think there's a sort of fact we band about the moment that we have more over 80-year-olds per square mile than Japan in South Ayrshire at the moment, I think it is. So we use that quite a lot when working with community partners in terms of the changing demographic of the local authority. The impact of siloed funding, as Andrew mentioned earlier, pockets of money come in for specific reasons, but actually tends to be working with the same sort of families in the same communities, but with very different outcomes or reports that have to be written for that as well. We struggle to recruit for posts, in particular in South Ayrshire, and all of that comes together and creates a huge level of challenge for us in a difficult fiscal situation. We have had approaches for a long time in terms of budget cuts, and I'm glad Donna mentioned the money situation about the continual salami slicing. Every service cut 10%, every service cut another 10%, to the point there isn't any more 10% to take out of the budget, and we need to begin to think differently about how we deliver those services. and how we come together as an authority to think differently about reform, and also about how we deliver services in a different way with better outcomes for our particular families across South Ayrshire. Just the next slide, Andrew, thanks. When we started some of this work, we mapped out what it would be, what it would look like to be a service user in South Ayrshire. And this is Claire and Jake, a family from one of our more deprived areas within South Ayrshire. And it maps all the services that are involved with that one family. And when you put that up at any meeting I've been to, you sort of get a rapid intake of breath from people about what's it like to be in the middle of that map, telling your story over and over again to different services, having to share what your background, what you would like, what your needs are with a whole range of different services. But also what's key in this, from the lens that we initially came into this work, is how much duplication is there within that approach. Many of those services, if not all of them, are working to build relationships and trust. It's relationship-based support, but there's too many people, too much resource, often working to different funding pots and strategies, but often looking for the same outcome within for the family at the centre of that as well. And we know that in terms of the duplication, we've taken a very, very small area of our work around about parenting and parenting support, and actually just mapping that out in a small authority, such as South Ayrshire, over 6 or 7 different services, all providing that parenting work very often to the same families in the same areas. And that duplication of resource, assessment, referral on, that continually just goes round and round the system, but actually making very little impact on that. So that's been a key, and actually probably our long-term aim as an authority is when we come, to come back at some point in the future, and that, it's a very different picture that we were able to share about how our services work to support families across the authority. Next slide, thanks, Andrew. We started this work by looking very much at how we aligned the work across children's services in the first instance, and Billy will share with you what's happening across adult services as well. But we started within a sort of radical review of how our children's services worked and our children's services planning in South Ayrshire, reducing the duplication of resource to have a greater impact on the children and families that we were working with, and actually honing in on what was making the difference, using data and being very, very much data-led in terms of the decisions we made about where we put resource. And we used the whole family wellbeing funding to move us to a locality-based model. So we put resources back into school clusters and into localities, and therefore into communities. And we were having a discussion just at the beginning here about the pots of money that come out, such as the money that's there for the whole family wellbeing funding. And I think there's a nervousness about actually having started this journey about pots of money being available, becoming projects, and being very clear that we can't continually run public services and particularly support for families through projects. We need to develop and change the way we actually deliver services and the way we work as professionals within the communities that we work in as well. So although we've used the whole family wellbeing funding, and that was to get us much further upstream in terms of preventative work, a great focus of that has been about how does that change the core delivery of the services going forward when that money is no longer there. So we've used it almost like seed funding, but it's to change the way current services actually work and go about their daily business. It's no longer about schools planning for individual children, but beginning to plan for families and to see the whole family as part of the solution, along with what the community can offer and what the community has within its resource as well, and to reduce the number of services or people working with families across South Ayrshire. And I think one of the key things for us has been particularly that focus on family support and trying to move people, and I say this as a former head teacher, from my school, my resource, my children, to actually looking at families and community-based support within that model that we're looking at the moment. So we moved on, thanks Andrew, on to I think you may need to click them. I think we've not moved them in. Onto the delivery of what we now call Family First within South Ayrshire, and that was improving the aspect of community leadership. It really takes a village to raise a child, and what do our villages and towns contribute to the role of supporting families, local resources for local problems that need local solutions. The key driver for this work has been the Community Planning Partnership, of which the Children's Services Planning Partnership sits within. And I think one of the key aspects, and I think the very first slide we put up, is this all sits within very effective, we believe, community planning within South Ayrshire. And I probably can't stress enough how much investment has gone into that, in particular into building relationships, the leadership of the community planning partnership, investing the time, the importance of it. You know, it's a central body for local authorities in terms of planning, but investing in it. So we used to have lots of short meetings and not everybody would attend. Now, if you go along, we have them in County Hall. It's full attendance from services because people see the value in it. They see actually their voices are part of shaping that plan going forward for the whole community across South Ayrshire, but they also see the impact of the work that's happening. And we've had some really successful outcomes from that work, the Ageing Well strategy, which Billy will maybe touch on, but the Family First is very much rooted within that work as well. So for many local authorities, the community planning partnership can be an add-on, or it doesn't work as effectively as possible. It can be sometimes burdensome to go along to meetings, difficult to show impact. And if there's one thing I think we would see was that investment in time within getting that bit right before we launch into any of the other reform work. If that body works well and engages a wide variety of partners and engages people in that vision, the moving forward on the different types of work that we're talking about is much easier within that. Okay, I think we'll just move on. Sorry, Andrew, the next slide, thank you. From that work within Family First and within the community planning partnership, there's been further work to develop a place-based approach. And we've developed work to pilot a model which we call currently Working for Wallistown. And that was solely grounded in the work of the community planning partnership resource. It's about, again, allocating resources to localities, but with a focus on those people most in need in the area. Very, very much data driven. Who are the families, who are the individuals that we will make a difference to, that use the greatest resource within that area. And if we change our approach to working with those families or those individuals, we would see an impact quickly in terms of what happens. So we've put in a team of navigators, one point of contact for people within the Wallistown area, and have been able to get underneath some of the real community-based issues, working really closely with partners. And we're seeing significant impact, and it's a small area, within the safety of the area, antisocial behaviour. We have quite significant data around about reductions in police calls, etc., and significant financial gains for families working within the financial inclusion work that's happening within there. And it's a continual focus about trying to reduce the services, provide the support in the locality of where it's needed, and to instantly make decisions and support families and communities where the resource needs to be within there. Trying to get rid of the range of assessment instead of referring on to services, pulling services in. Thanks, Andrew. However, even with that work that's happened well and that's been successful, there's still a place about coordinating services and referring on, and how do you can provide one person, but that one person can end up being the person who just refers on it, and we don't actually begin to change how services work round about families and communities. So although it's coordinated better, we're still seeing quite significant duplication of resources and people perhaps unsure of their role within there and still feeling that we should be putting all the services in to almost cover ourselves to make sure everybody's got an input into a family or into a community, but actually not taking the big step back to look at, do we need those services in, or are we doing what we've always done before? So we need to take the best parts of what we've achieved so far through the Family First model, through the Wallistown and locality planning, and develop a model along the lines of the liberated method, which you'll see in the slides there, which is very much about pulling in resource when you need, instead of this continual referring out, and trying to reduce the burden of assessment and referral that we have within the system, which when you go into individual services is really quite significant. We know that this is grounded in the work of the community planning partnership. We know we're at quite a difficult, and I'll talk just at the end about what we need and what the ask is from the wider system. But this has allowed us to kickstart some real questions round about the delivery of services in our most vulnerable areas, particularly in the Ayr North, and to begin to sort of visualise really how differently this would look if we can bring together partners such as the Health and Social Care Partnership and our third sector to deliver something really quite radical that will make a difference on the ground. So I'll pass over on to Billy, and Billy just give you a wee bit more of the detail about what we've done so far across the services.
Yeah, thanks, Lyndsay. Everybody hear me? My mic wasn't working earlier. Excellent, that's good. So Lyndsay's talked a little there about what's been going on within children's services, and my colleague Mark Ingalls, who's my equivalent in children's services, has very much been leading that work. And we came into post around the similar time, 2018 I came into post, 2019 Mark came into post. And what we've been definitely doing is working towards the same end point, but we've had to work in parallel lines up until this point, because we had, when we came into post 6 years ago, we were in a really difficult position, huge overspends, lots of crisis management, spending lots of money, not delivering very good outcomes. And what we knew we needed to do, and I liked Andrew's sort of initial reference to the Christie report, was really drive at those Christie principles. So prevention, partnership working, participation of communities, and performance. And we've really driven that hard across both services. Next slide, please. So when I first came into post, one of the first places I went to have a look at was Wigan. I've said that to Donna before, and what I was really impressed with the Wigan model was that community engagement and that investment in communities, in third sector and communities really taking ownership of what was going on. So we've spent a lot of time, there's a couple of pictures there. We've got League of Champions, which is a group of people with a learning disability who've driven our learning disability strategy. We've got Ageing Well Champions boards that have driven our Ageing Well strategy. Signs of Safety is the work that Mark's done in children's services area. So that's very much a big cultural move towards shifting power, handing over power, not holding on to it, but really trying to give that power and encourage not just participation, but encourage leadership of our communities. Next slide, please, Andrew. The other thing that was going on around that time was on a pan-Ayrshire basis. We were developing a model, I think around 2017-18, which was about this team around a person. So starting to get this concept of starting first with the needs of the person in the home, and then working outward from there, thinking about what the third sector might support, outward from there, looking at the primary care team, and then outward from there, the community team. And that model actually was then adopted by the Scottish Government, but unfortunately the timing was absolutely terrible. That was published, I'm not even sure it actually got formally published, because it came in just at the time that COVID hit. And of course, within adult services, we essentially lost 2 or 3 years around that time. So it was really challenging times. But what we did was hold on to that as a concept and to try and move forward. So during a really tricky time during COVID, we were still working with that in our minds, but it definitely slowed that progress down. That really model, I think, has now come through into now what within Scotland, within a Scotland context, is the GERFI model. So the Getting It Right for Everyone model. That's that sort of next national ambition, if you like. And I'll talk more about that in a second. Next slide, please, Andrew. So where this, once we sort of emerged from COVID, and it did feel like we were emerging into the light, we got the headspace to be able to think. So we've been trying to do this for a little while now. What is it? What's the concept? What are we trying to achieve in South Ayrshire? So our concept was team around the locality, and that really merged those primary care teams with the community teams, health and care working together, being co-located, sharing information, meeting on a weekly basis, discussing really complex cases, and not having people tripping up over each other up and down the path, which is what we know tends to happen. So really trying to take that more streamlined approach, but very much still at that point within a health and care context. So that is still a health and care team with a focus on sort of older adults and adults with complex needs. So I'll not go through the detail in that slide, and you'll see that, but that captures in a one slide what we were trying to achieve. And we've now got 6 localities within South Ayrshire, and we've got that model now in place, and we are, as part of that GERFI network, that Getting It Right for Everyone network, we are sharing the work that we're doing around that team around the locality. Next slide, please. Thanks. The next, if you can just flip these on. So Connect South Ayrshire is the next iteration. So once we developed those MDT teams, we also knew that we we hadn't gone far enough around that prevention work. We were still really waiting for referrals to come into a service. We weren't working proactively at the community level. And we'd done a lot of engagement work through our evolution of the team around the locality. So we'd gone out and engaged, asked people what it was that they were looking for. And essentially what people were looking for was information, easy to access, nice and simple, so they can navigate what we know is a really complex system. And they were looking for that in a few different ways. So some people wanted that kind of walking off the street and have a chat to someone. Other people would like to pick up the phone, and others, like myself, would rather Google it. So those three sort of platforms, digital, telephone, and a physical shopfront space is where we now have that connect model. But we went beyond a health and care context at that point. We worked through the community planning partnership that Lyndsay described, and that involves police, money advice, housing services, the whole shebang really, third sector. And depending which locality it's in will depend on who turns up and does drop-in shops where people can just walk in and have a chat to somebody and get some help with something. And we've got navigators in there that help people navigate the system too. The website's up and running, and the single phone line is now up and running. So that really gives us real firm foundations around where we're moving next. Thanks, Andrew. So as I say, the next step for us is twofold, really. The getting it right for everyone still, in my view, remains at the moment a health and care context. It's about bringing health and care teams together. It is about very much being more person-centered and more joined up, but it still has its limitations. Next slide, please, Andrew. So the work that we've been doing with Mutual Ventures is about how we bring together what Mark and Lyndsay have done within a children's service context and what we've been doing in an adult service context. And we're going to focus in that area that Lyndsay described, which is the highest, the area of highest need. And through the work that Mutual Ventures have done, we've identified 4 priority areas. So people at risk of homelessness, families in poverty, children who are not ready for school, and drug and alcohol related deaths. And of course, unlike the silos that Andrew started at the start, we know that all of these are often interrelated. So there's lots of interrelation there around that. So what we're looking for is the people with real intersectionality around all of that, and identifying between 5 and 10 families to start our work on. And we're going to be starting that in April. Next slide, please, Andrew. So the design principles, I'll not repeat them. It really reinforces what we've already been doing, but is much broader. And gives much broader in terms of the partners involved, but much more targeted in terms of the people that we're looking to support. So those with the most complex need, getting in, really developing those relationships and thinking about what really matters to them. Mark often gives a great example, I think, and it's about when we're having those conversations, not just thinking, what is it that I can deliver here, but actually what's the real fundamental challenge. And Donna referenced Radical Help by Hilary Cottam. That's a book that I really hold dear when I think about the model that we're trying to achieve. And it's, if the person is trying to get a job and they're going for a job interview and they keep not getting knocked back because they've got tattoos, then actually the tattoo removal is the most important thing at that stage. Next slide, please, Andrew. So this is really starting to set out who's involved. So we have now developed an operational team that are overseeing the development of this work. So Lyndsay and I sit on the strategic group. We've got an operational group that are working together to bring all the different partners together. We've now identified individual leaders, sort of frontline leaders who get this, who absolutely understand what it is that we're trying to get at. I think that's absolutely crucial with this model, and really people who are going to be working together and develop that on the ground. So that's where we are starting, and then we're going to be looking at how we then, once we've developed and proved that concept within that particular area, we're then looking at how we spread that as just, this is how we do things in South Ayrshire thereafter. So that's really where we've got to with the work. And as I say, we're starting at looking at starting that in April. So it will be up and running in April. And I'll leave Lyndsay to do the last slide. Thanks.
Thanks, Billy. Thank you. So just, I suppose, just to end on what's our ask of the wider system? And we are engaging with Scottish Government colleagues round about some of this work already, both in some of their work streams and within the Public Sector Reform Directorate. But there's an ask about, we need to begin to think on a much bigger scale round about the siloed funding and how we might change that, and how you begin to work across services to give and take a bit of that funding round about the pots that comes in on. If we can't get to a position where we have one, the perfect one world would be one fund, one plan, one report. So how do we begin to really unpick that siloed funding and work across a local authority within the Health and Social Care Partnership to begin to have a bit of a push and a pull about funding and give up a wee bit of something to get something back for the greater good? So we're working on that area just now, but that's a big ask for the system. I think we need to begin to think about the pots of funding that are all focused on similar long-term outcomes and measures. There's a bit of a discussion across the system as well round about outcomes and measures, and thinking about the longer term outcomes and measures, and trying to get us to think beyond short-term KPIs that are linked to small pots of funding that encourage us to do project-based work and not begin to think about radical reform of service. So there's an ask for the wider system about how do we begin to come together to think about what might those longer-term outcomes and measures be? How could we hold our nerve in terms of the development work to get to that point, putting in markers in terms of progress within that, but how do we hold our nerve round about, no, we need to see this for the long term because that's what will support reform. And that with that long-term vision of ideally one fund, one plan, one report. So even within the children's services, it's been fascinating just looking at the amounts of money that come in different funding streams from government with very different reports, which all kind of say the same thing. So how can we actually reduce the burden of that reporting on funding and begin to think about that in terms of one area of long-term outcomes and measures for our community as well? So that's probably our ask of our next steps now. When we're there, we're trying to push, we're trying to nudge the system within that. We don't want that to be a barrier to how we take things forward going over the next wee while, and we're determined that we'll find ways around it where we can. But we need the system and part of that wider reform work to begin to join up with us on that work. Thanks, Anne.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Lyndsay and Billy. So I'm just going to briefly talk about the process that we went through with the team at South Ayrshire. So I will be sharing these slides, and I do apologise, I'm not convinced I'm sharing these in the right way. So we will send the slides so you can see them all properly. I'm not going to go through all of this, but we will send, along with the recording, some information on radical place leadership and some of the key principles that sit behind it, such as developing that shared vision that we've now got in South Ayrshire, along with the priorities that Billy talked about, and then just that whole principle that runs all the way through of starting and ending with the person. One of the questions that came in actually was, how would you get started doing this? So this is the process that we went through. So we started by getting all of the leaders and key stakeholders within South Ayrshire together to talk about it and to make sure that everybody was up for it. So within the room, you had police, you had council representatives, you had representatives from the health sector, GPs, local third sector. We talked about the concept of trying to do something differently and getting teams working more closely together, co-locating even. And there was a lot of enthusiasm for that. And that's important to test that at the start. We spent some time doing deep dive interviews with all of the key leaders and looking at the data, looking at the different strategies. You'll all know that every place in Scotland will have a whole list of strategies for different organisations, different themes. We tried to distill all of that to try and get a single truth of what the overall strategic direction for a place was. And then we did some community engagement as well. And the whole idea there is just to get an idea of where we're starting from, what works well, what doesn't. Then it was into a further series of workshops to work out what's the overarching vision that we can all return to when we meet problems or bumps in the road, and what are those priorities? Because I think it's pretty easy to try and prioritize everything, and that might feel good, but it doesn't work, because if you prioritize everything, you prioritize nothing. So identifying those issues that Billy talked about, which were the ones specifically for South Ayrshire, they may be different elsewhere, that you have to identify the issues that are keeping all the different organizations that need to engage awake at night, and finding those is really important. And then two main pieces of design work really were the design of the neighbourhood delivery model. Billy showed you a snapshot of it. There's obviously more detail that sits behind that, that goes into how the team will work together, what sort of methodology that they'll use. And then the final piece of the puzzle is the really important part around how do you actually find the people who need support. And for that, we developed a prioritization framework working with colleagues in South Ayrshire. And that actually can be really simple or very complicated. So at one end of the spectrum, you have the ability just to get a group of professionals together and walk around, knock on doors, see who needs help. Then at the very far end of the scale, you can do more complex risks stratification, where you're looking at various sources of data and trying to predict as someone is entering crisis rather than just dealing with them when they have entered crisis. And where we will land is somewhere in the middle, where you're both using data but also community intelligence. So if you've got questions, please feel free, drop us a line. Be delighted to discuss any of this. I'm going to unshare my screen now. If you can just give me a nod to let me know that that has unshared. I'm convinced that Zoom has changed, and I've totally, after doing hundreds of these, I've totally forgotten how to use it. But I'm going to get into some questions now. There's been quite a few coming in. Donna, I want you with this first one. How do you think the open-ended offer on the open-ended offer, but within the constraints of a fixed budget, how does this work within services which are in silos, and what do you think the impact on financial efficiencies will be from offering that open-ended offer, if that makes sense?
Yeah, I think we overprescribe for people. We don't let frontline teams work together. We don't give them the permission to innovate, and we all insist on our own separately commissioned chunks of services, which very often are not the things that people actually want. As Mark Smith, who did the Gateshead work, often says, sometimes the best service is no service, and sometimes the things that people need are not within a service. But yet all we continue to do is measure people against set eligibility criteria to access a prescripted list of a menu of things that we've designed without people. So I think I wouldn't describe it as an open-ended offer. I'd describe it as a real offer based on a conversation. That's why in Wigan we had this, it was a social contract between the citizen and the state. That's what the deal was. It was, so we're not your parent, you're not the child, we are equal partners in this. So it's all about the relationship, and creating a system where people can get to know somebody, ask about what they need, get to know the reality of their life, rather than what they think they know about that person through what they've read about them against the eligibility criteria. I think that's the best way. I mean, the Audit Scotland report hit the nail on the head with this, didn't it, when it said about turning rhetoric into reality? It's culture shift. It's a huge culture shift. And one of the good things that isn't on Lyndsy's slides is the way that Lyndsay, Kevin and Billy grabbed this from day one and owned it and had that leadership drive to make it happen. I think a lot of people in public services are just worn out at the moment, within councils and within the NHS, and they're just having to be in that managed bath of tepid bath. They've got to, I think the exciting bit now is reimagining what good could look like, and it would be a personalised offer, which is usually cheaper. As Billy said, the community provide the best support, not us.
Yeah, thanks, Donna. There's a good question here, which I'm going to put to Billy. Oh, Billy, would you like to come in on that one, and then I'll.
No, I was just going to come in on Donna's point about. I think you're right, Donna. Certainly, as we emerged from COVID, I was pretty worn out. I think I said that on one of our first calls. I can definitely, I was getting to the point where I thought, can I keep going here? And it was actually having that positive vision for the future, recognizing we're heading somewhere positive and we've got a real collective energy about where it is that we're trying to get to together. that sort of really sort of reinvigorated me and my teams around what it is that we're doing. And I find it a really exciting place. For the first time, I do feel like we are delivering on the principles set out in Christie. And I've said for a long time, I feel a bit like the Monty Python sketch where you say, what did Christie ever do for us? Or what did we ever do for Christie, essentially? But actually, when you look back now, we are definitely getting ahead of steam around delivering on those Christie principles.
Yeah.
And we've just, hot off the press, we've just... we are finalists in the UK in Transformation Awards, Public Service Transformation Awards.
That's right,
for our Aging Well work, which is very much about primary prevention, places, spaces, communities. Nothing about health and care services, actually. It's all about getting the right housing, getting the right transport, making sure people have meaningful things to do. And that's, for me, what really energizes myself and my team.
And Billy, while I have you, just a question here about the navigator role that I think you mentioned, and just to describe what that is.
Yeah, so that is actually, again, it's a person employed by our third sector partner, so VASA, so Voluntary Action South Ayrshire. So they are in this physical hub, this shop front. It's on the high street, and people can walk in off the street and or telephone call to them, and they essentially have that broad overview of all sorts of stuff, pretty much everything, police. It's the person who knows the person, if that makes sense. So anybody can ring up with any sort of problem, and it's their job to say, and I'm going to use my Chief Social Work Officer's analogy here. He talks about where's the beans. So where's the beans principle is, you walk into the supermarket and you've got somebody stacking the broccoli over in the corner. You go over to them saying, look, I'm looking for the beans. Do you know where they are? And somebody turns around to you and says, no, I don't do beans. I just work with broccoli, and put their head down and carry on working with the broccoli. This person's job is to go, I don't know where the beans are. I know somebody who does know where the beans are. I'll take you across. Here's John. He knows where the beans are. So it's that sort of approach, really, and taking ownership, doing the right thing first time, essentially.
Very good. Thank you. Lyndsay, a couple of questions from you. There are two quite similar ones, one from Julie, one from Sinead. They're about the community planning partnership. And so just keen to hear a bit more about if there are any barriers to the CPP partnership working, and what's your approach to the leadership challenge in terms of turning national government directives into local initiatives. I think these questions are really just getting about how you engage and involve the community planning partnerships, and if there's investment in the leadership there.
I think there has been, Andrew. I think one of the key things initially is its value and importance in terms of how the council works. So that comes from, say from the chief exec down. Is that a vehicle that is valued, that is seen as to have impact, can make decisions, and the more importance it was given, then the more people have turned up and been part of that work within there. One of the key things, it now sits within our strategic planning, corporate strategy and planning directed within the council. So it's very much a vehicle for council planning. So it doesn't stand alone. It has a bit more power probably than it had before, which is given more importance. And one of the key focuses I think we would talk to, it's led by our Assistant Director of Corporate and Strategic Planning, has been about a focus on data and ensuring that people within the community planning partnership understand the communities that they serve. So initiatives that are not just plucked out of thin air or discussions around about everybody sharing bits of practice. It's been that real look at, this is South Ayrshire. What does it look like? And it is about, those big messages round about the declining population, which then led to, actually, we need to react here to an ageing well strategy, which we could not deliver on our own within local government or public service. It must require partnership working in terms of third sector, etc. So that's really linked in. So that evidence base to start the work. Similarly with the child poverty, some of the work that initially started, the family first work, which is rooted in the Children's Services Planning Partnership, came from the Promise, which also sits within that area. And it's becoming really forensic at the use of data within that, looking at, it was out with placements at that point, in terms of children who were in out with care placements, £3.5 to £4 million a year, not great outcomes, and putting those real elephants on the table to say to people, this is not working, could we do it differently? And you begin to get people to take a bit of ownership of that. So it's been very, very much grounded in the use of data, and impact, I think, has made a difference to people as well. Relationships have been really important. Small things like just giving time for meetings, sharing everything that's there, allowing people to come along to share the good work that's happening across the whole of the council, and investing time in people and to build those relationships within that. We are all coming from equally challenging circumstance, whether it's financially, third sector have a different challenge, but we can't do it on our own. So how do we engage more with our partners around the table to strengthen and give that system lift to the offer that we have within South Ayrshire? So it takes time, and it goes back to people often, and taking the time to make sure you invest in quality meetings and opportunities to engage people within that.
Fantastic, thank you, Lyndsay. Donna mentioned one of our attendees here is Professor Kate Ardern, who is the Director of Public Health at Wigan with Donna. Kate's put a question in here about how we're thinking about addressing inequalities in power and control between citizens and services, with the kind of underlying suggestion that those with power don't give it up easily. So Billy or Lyndsay, do you want to say something just about engagement with citizens and attempts to try and rebalance that power dynamic?
Yeah, I saw a question further up the chat as well, a bit about that. How are we continuing to nurture that engagement? Yes. And you heard me talk about, this is something that I very much took away from my visit to Wigan, which is about that shift from a passive engagement. So what we often used to talk about was engagement. So we'll write a strategy in a dark room somewhere. We'll go out and say, what do you think to this? And we'll probably not listen to you, even if you do bother to have a look at it and give us any feedback on it. So that's sort of old world. I think we've reached a point where we're at participation. So what we've got now, you heard me say, we've got various champions boards. There are champions boards within Lyndsay's and Mark's bit of the world. We've got various champions boards. So if we are developing and delivering strategies now, we have champions boards that help us both create those strategies, but also then hold us to account around those strategies. So they are the community strategies, and those are both at a locality level. So we've got 6 localities, as you heard me say. So we've got what are called locality planning partnerships. They have citizens from those areas, and they hold us to account and develop strategies that are place-based strategies. And then, of course, there are theme-based sort of pieces of work, Ageing Well being one of them, which are common across the whole of South Ayrshire. And again, we've got various champions boards there. So we've got lots and lots of people who are engaged and hold us to account. Is it perfect? Absolutely not. I went and shared our work at a conference in Canada because of the engagement work that we've been doing, because I think we are, is sector leading engagement work. There's loads of other stuff I could tell you about. We do something called 3 People, 3 Questions, where we go out and everyone that we engage with, every member of our team across health and care goes out one week and asks 3 people 3 simple questions about what are we doing well, what would you like us to do better, and what do we need to do next. So those sorts of things, and then the usual sort of stuff as well. There are some great examples internationally, though, where I think they've gone beyond that. And I think we're always really looking to learn. And what we're trying to move to is from a participation through to leadership. And we're starting to get there through some of these champions boards, where those champion boards are very much directing us and holding us to account now, and therefore have real shared ownership around allocating of resource, which I think was the crux of the question, wasn't it?
Thank you very much, Billy. Don, I'm going to bring you on this, but I want to get one more question in before we run out of time. No, please.
Sorry. Sorry. Yeah, I was just going to say, Kate I think she's put that in the chat, that she'd created this amazing network of 23,000 community health champions operating on streets and in communities. So perhaps she could, I don't know if you met any of them when you came to Wigan, but she'll send you some stuff, I'm sure.
Thank you very much. So Donna and Lyndsay, I want to get your final thoughts. I want to talk about trust. So right at the start, we talked about the importance of creating the enabling environment in a place, and that requires trust between the leaders and the ability for services to work together and accept that they're going to be asking their staff to be making efforts that all of the benefits may not fall back to their organization. How do you go about building that trust? Lyndsay, do you want to say something first, and then I'll bring Donna in for a final word.
Thanks, Andrew. And I think this is a moving feast. I think we're still learning and working our way through this. I think we connect, Billy, myself, Mark, across, had a really clear vision, come from similar background in terms of what we want out of this model. What's been really interesting now, though, is you hit budget times, and there's already discussions and quite some difficult discussions around about how far are people willing to go with this, because there isn't the funding there. And I'm, I'll be honest with you, we've had some difficult discussions around about that trust with maintaining what we're doing. We can't change where we've come from, but what do we give up from each other? And I'll be honest with you, I'm not sure where we'll get to in that, because there's already been some discussions about holding each other to account a bit. You'll have to change how you do that for us to maintain that, and that's going to be really hard. I'll support you in this, but we'll take a bit of this part of the support to allow that to continue. So I think that will be a big challenge for us moving forward, particularly within the way we're structured in Scotland. It is, the Health and Social Care Partnership have a different fund, a different body of money for, although the kit comes from the council. So we're already in that discussions just now about the give and take across the services, and if who makes the saving, who puts the saving up. So that all of that comes into it. So building those relationships and making sure that trust is there at the very beginning. We're able to have those conversations, and I think that's really important. We've not been trenched back into our own silos and draw the drawstring and the drawbridge and doing our own thing. But we're going to have to. It's going to take a wee while for us to work through that, I would think.
Fantastic, thank you, Lyndsay. Donna, any final thoughts on that?
Yeah, I just think it's really hard. It's hard but exciting, as Billy said.
Yeah.
It's difficult for everyone in Scottish Government and in local government and on health boards, because we're still trying to make person-centred working operate within a system of new public management. And that is so deeply ingrained in all of our psyches. And there's a real reluctance from ministers, from, councillors, to let go of that power and to pass it down to frontline teams. But that's what needs to happen. That's the only way it will happen. It's brilliant. We've got Kenny Steele, Chief Exec of Highland Hospice, on the call, and that's what he does every day with his staff, because there's less restrictions on hospices, because they're charitably funded usually. So you've got that, and I think we've got to adopt some of the best practice and behaviours from the community and voluntary sector. We've really got to let our frontline team be liberated to do the best thing.
100%. That's our time up. Just a huge thank you to Lyndsay, Billy, and Donna. We're going to be sending out the recording of this along with some supporting materials. If you're interested in exploring this journey yourself, drop me a line. I'm andrew@mutualventures.co.uk. It'd be great to hear from you. But for now, thank you very much, and hope everyone has a good rest of their day.